When do we help, and what is the bystander effect? Here's a summary of the situational factors that predict when we help others. We'll briefly cover each one of these variables in this lecture. We help when we have time. When we're in a rural environment. When our culture values others' well-being. When we're in a good mood, or sometimes a bad one. When we've been exposed to pro-social media. When we observe helpful role models. When we're aware of pro-social norms. And when we're the only bystander. The first situational variable we're going to cover is time. Essentially, we help when we have time. If we feel rushed or behind schedule or cognitively preoccupied, we're less likely to help someone in need. Some of the first evidence of this was produced by Darley and Batson in the 1970s. They asked seminary students to deliver a lecture about the story of the Good Samaritan from the Christian faith. The moral of the parable is that low-status individuals are sometimes more virtuous because they aren't as preoccupied with themselves. On their way to deliver the lecture, the participants encountered a Confederate in need of help, the real test of their hypothesis. In one condition, the participants were early. In another condition, they were right on time. And in the third condition, they were running several minutes late. The results are shown here on the slide. The more time they had to spare, the more likely they were to help the Confederate. We're also more likely to help when in a rural environment. Evidence for this comes from the trend that we're less likely to help strangers in urban areas, in large cities, in densely populated area, and in regions with lower economic well-being. In addition, we're more likely to help when our culture places a high value on others' well-being. For example, Sympatia cultures are described by harmony, respect, and empathy, and helping rates tend to be higher in these cultures. Table 10.3 from the textbook highlights some of the least and most helpful cities across the globe. One of the differences between the two lists is that helping tends to be more prevalent in countries with lower economic well-being. Research is less clear about the predictive power of collectivism versus individualism. It appears that collectivists are more responsive to the needs of nearby people, but less responsive to abstract needs than individualists. Our mood also influences when we help. Good moods lead to helping when we have a desire to maintain the positivity, and when we have positive thoughts and expectations about helping. Just about anything can put us in a good mood: pleasant weather, pleasant smells, personal accomplishments, and receiving great news. Bad moods lead to helping when we take personal responsibility for causing our bad mood, when we focus on other people instead of ourselves, and when we think about our personal values that promote helping. These situations represent the negative state relief model. Essentially, we help in order to feel better. Humans of all ages tend to help when they've been exposed to pro-social media. For example, after playing video games in which the characters help and support each other, and after watching TV programs in which the characters model helping behaviors. Representing social learning theory, we tend to help when we've been exposed to pro-social role models. They provide specific examples of what behavior to imitate. They teach observers that helping is valued and rewarded. And they increase awareness of a culture or society's standards of conduct. We also help when we're aware of pro-social norms, of the rules that reflect standards of social approval and disapproval. If we aren't aware of these rules, we probably won't follow them. Here are a few examples. The norm of reciprocity dictates that we give back to those who give to us. The norm of equity says we give to those who are under-benefited when we are over-benefited. The norm of social responsibility says to help those who need it. Other norms are based on one's ideas about justice, fairness, and religion. The final situational variable we'll cover in this lecture is the bystander effect, a strange phenomenon that occurs when the presence of other people inhibits helping. Darley and Ladinay initiated the research in this area. They were inspired by an unfortunate real-life event. Take a moment to watch the video clip about this heinous crime and the social psychologists who studied it. What the researchers found was that the more bystanders around, the less likely they were to help the person in need. At least one person in a 3-person group is more likely to help than in a 15-person group, for instance. They also found that the bystander effect was weaker in dangerous situations. This is probably because these situations are clearly emergencies, and there's no doubt that they need to intervene immediately. Fortunately, teaching people about the bystander effect can make them less vulnerable to it, which is one of the reasons we focus on it in this class. You may find yourself in a position to help someone in an emergency situation, and you'll be more prepared to take the lead and solve the problem. Here are the steps involved in a bystander's decision to intervene. At each step, there are several challenges that hold us back from choosing to help the victim. Step 1 is to notice. Some of the reasons we might fail to notice someone in need of help include: other people can distract us and divert our attention away from the emergency. Self-concerns can lead us to focus on ourselves, not the situation or the person. And stimulus overload can lead us to ignore the emergency altogether. Step 2 is to interpret the situation as an emergency. One of the challenges here is pluralistic ignorance, which leads us to mistakenly believe that our perceptions and thoughts are different from others, when in fact, they're perceiving and thinking the same thing. Step 3 is to take responsibility of the situation. Here, we have to overcome the diffusion of responsibility, the belief that others will or should be the ones to help. If every bystander takes this position, no one helps. Bystanders are more likely to help when they are alone, when there's no one else to share the responsibility with, when they know the victim or the other bystanders, and when they have a role or occupation that helps, like when they're a leader, doctor, nurse, teacher, or police officer. Step 4 is to decide to help. Sometimes we don't choose to help because we think we don't have the necessary knowledge or skills, or because the costs appear to outweigh the benefits. Step 5 is to move forward and actually help the victim. Even at this stage, we have a few things working against us. Audience inhibition creates a reluctance to help for fear of making a bad impression. We sometimes hesitate here because we fear we'll get in trouble or reprimanded by others. Because of its potentially disastrous results, social psychologists have identified several ways we can overcome the bystander effect. First, ask the perceived victim if they do, in fact, need help. Remove the ambiguity by finding out. Second, volunteer to take on the leadership role. Someone needs to take direction. You might say something like, "We need to help. This is what we're going to do." Third, single out at least one person to call 911. Looking directly at the individual, say, "You, in the red shirt, please call for an ambulance." Fourth, ask for competent volunteers to step forward and carry out essential tasks. For example, ask if anyone knows CPR, or if specific individuals can help you carry or move objects that are in the way. Fifth, give specific instructions to these volunteers. Once you've identified people with relevant skills, you'll want to be specific about what needs to be done. Remember that not everyone can think clearly in these situations, and although it may seem obvious that they need to do XYZ, it's best if you just tell them what to do. For instance, "You help me move them off the street." "You start CPR." "You turn off the ignition." "You find some water." In previous semesters, I've asked students to submit slogans or phrases that exemplify what needs to be done to overcome the bystander effect. Here are a few examples of their submissions. And here are a few examples of relevant quotes by external sources. At this point, you should be more familiar with pro-social behavior, why we help, who helps, whom they help, and when they help. In the next lecture, we'll switch gears and focus on the opposite end of the spectrum, aggressive behaviors, or those that are intended to cause harm to others.